Yeah.
Okay, good to go.
Okay, welcome to episode 4 of Thermal Birding. Today we're talking development of lamping and thermal studies at Shieldhall Farm. Joined by Kevin and Stephen. I'm Ben Dolan from West Midlands Ringing Group, and with me is...
I'm Paul Hotwood from West Midlands Ringing Group.
Brilliant.
Kevin Sinclair from Clyde Ringing Group.
And I'm Stephen Inglis from Clyde Ringing Group as well.
Great. So what we're going to do is Paul will just unshare ours, and if you want to share your PowerPoint, and then we'll leave you to it just to talk us through your experiences with thermal.
Okay. Just getting ourselves sorted here, guys. Just give me 2 seconds. It's saying disabled at the moment for screen sharing.
Stand by, Kev. Try again now.
Okay, so right. Just click through previous couple, and we're nearly there. Okay, all right, we're good to go. Right, thanks very much, chaps, for inviting us along. This is going to be a wee double act tonight, so I'm going to just kick off with a brief introduction, and then Stephen's going to get into some of the nitty-gritty. We'll swap over about halfway through, and then essentially a wee wind up at the end where we'll both chuck our tuppence worth in. So obviously, I think as we've discussed, chaps, if there's any questions en route, that's absolutely fine. Okay. So as Ben said, we're going to chat about the development of lamping and thermal studies at Shieldhall Farm. Just a little overview of what we're going to cover. Brief few slides about the site that our study's based on. Stephen's got a bit of a history here. He's been studying this site for years prior to us starting the thermal stuff. So he's going to talk a little bit about that. We'll give you a wee overview of what our study has involved over the past 13-14 months and how that has evolved, with the use of thermal latterly. We'll give you some information about kind of data recording that we undertake and a wee look at the catch patterns on site. So principally we're looking at, woodcock, jacks and snipe. And weaving through that, there's going to be, references to how thermal has supported us. But don't worry if you don't see the big bang in terms of how thermal's benefited us. Stephen will be coming to that later on in the talk. So we've got a couple of nice slides there that I think really highlight how it's benefited us. And then we've got a slide that really just talks about, what our next steps are going to be regarding thermal in the future. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand over to Stephen. He's going to chat you through a wee bit of background about the site.
Thanks, Kevin. So our little site is covered by the Clyde Ringing Group kind of catchment area, just about 12 miles southwest of Glasgow. So if you go to the next slide, please, Kevin. This just gives you an idea of where we are. So it's the blue polygon there. So we kind of an upland habitat. So it's a farm essentially. With a mixture of kind of pasture, bog, and then surrounding plantations, so a bit of a mix of habitats. And as Kevin mentioned, it's a site I've been interested in for over 10 years now. Kind of started my birding when I was younger here, and just gradually been building up a picture of what's present. And in the lead up to us starting dazzling and lamping, we're starting to get a good indication that there's quite a lot of waders using this site nocturnally. So I've done some stuff with camera traps before and some roost observations. So it probably was a good place to try and give this a go. If you go into the next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, and then. Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's some bog on the farm. So that's an overview of the sort of site. and I'll pass over back to Kevin, who's going to talk a little bit through the actual lamping timeline. You're muted.
We started this study back in January 2022, and it's ongoing at the moment. So just to put, what we're talking about into context, a wee timeline just to give you a feel for how things have developed for us. So January 22 was when it all kicked off, and at that point in time, it was all pre-thermal stuff. So it was binoculars and torch for eye dazzle. So Stephen's your man for that. And really, we were covering quite a vast area. Now, the site, is 120 odd hectares. It's a big old site. And you can imagine tramping over that is quite a substantial amount of ground to cover, particularly when you're relying on eye dazzle to pick up birds. So we carried that on until the end of March 2022. And at that point in time, our catch trip average was about 3 birds. And as I say, mixture of woodcock, jacks, and some common snipes. Picking up again when the birds return in mid-September is when we introduced thermal last year. And it's Pulsar Helion 2XP Pro that we use. And by the end of February this year, our catch trip average had upped itself to about 5 birds. Now, you might not think, 2 birds per trip is much, but when you start taking into account that you're probably talking about 20 trips there, you're talking about 40 birds potentially that thermal, not 100% has secured or guaranteed, but it's played a significant role in what we're catching at site. And for us, because we started off in January last year, really just trying to find our way around this site, a big thing for us was really, a lot of data collection, analysis, and trying to just refine what we were doing to work a bit smarter over time, because it's a big site, as I say, and it was a big challenge. And without collecting the data and looking at it, we were going to struggle to know exactly where we could eke out improvements. So just in terms of some of the scores and the doors there, up until the end of last month, we were looking at 68 woodcock, which we had ringed. We had one exciting report of a recovery. Sadly, the bird was murdered in Ireland, as I imagine many are. The jack snipe figures are probably of most interest to us, myself and Stephen personally. 36 birds ringed, but it's the retrap numbers which are particularly exciting there. And Stephen's going to expand on that later, because there's a nice little story emerging around about where those birds are appearing on site and their behaviours when they're there. So 36 ringed, 15 retraps, and a couple of those birds have been retrapped a few times.
Gents, just for context, is this site sort of a nocturnal roost site, or is it a nocturnal feeding site, or a daytime roost site?
So it's principally nocturnal, but Stephen, I'll let you pick up on that one simply because Stephen's been looking at surrounding area as well.
You're on mute, Steve.
I always get you once. Yeah, when we're going round at night, it's on foraging habitat that we're catching birds, so they're all coming in to feed. But there is also within kind of reasonable distance of a kilometre or so, where probably most of these birds are going to be roosting through the day. But we haven't yet. I'll come on to that later about the daytime roosts, particularly for jacks.
Okay, cheers, boys.
Excellent. So in terms of our initial approach, and again, just to give you an idea of how things have changed over time. So I mentioned at the beginning, binocular and torch scanning for eye shine. That was how we started off. Landing net design was a modified or a carp net with initially a carbon fibre pole, and I'll treat you to a wee bit of video in the next slide, which might entertain some of you who've refined your dazzling and catching technique. We also toyed with the approach in terms of a single approach for birds or a dual approach out dazzling. And I think we've kind of settled on a method that we're comfortable with, which is essentially Stephen tends to lead on the dazzling side of things, and I tend to lead in the netting, or we do, and we can interchange. Again, experience tells us a big site, in the early days, we were walking somewhere between 4 and 6 miles in a session over farmland, lasting somewhere between 4 and 5 hours. So with a big net against the Scottish wind, sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge, and fatigue gets the better of you, particularly for a 57-year-old, The younger one between us has probably managed to do that twice over, but it was a hard shift. So a dual approach sits a lot better. It's good company. Plus, as I say, it's a big old place. And if it wasn't for Stephen and some of the foggier nights, I perhaps would have still been up there somewhere in a bog on the hills. Again, hopefully some of the spreadsheets are, slides that I'll pull up and shortly will give you an idea of how we've looked at the data to get a better understanding of the environmental conditions and how they've influenced what we're catching. So I've put forensic recording. That probably it would be more accurately termed very anal recording of data. We're very focused on the data that we gather. We've probably come off that slightly as we've got a bit more familiar with the site, but I don't think in retrospect we'd go back and change much because it's been helpful to look back, and some of the slides I'm about to show you will hopefully highlight that. So this is the wee video. So you'll see the bird down here and the glimpse of the net up there. So I'll just play this for you, then I'll have a laugh at myself in a minute. Okay. So there you see, we've got a net there which is large enough to accommodate at least, I would reckon, 2 elephants worth in there. And that net has, as I say, been refined. It's been chopped back because it was a bit like a yacht sail at that stage. So we've tweaked it. We went through 2 carbon fibre poles, which one was expensive, but 2 taught us very quickly that battling against the wind up there, the joints just go at the end of the carbon fibre pole. So we basically ended up with an aluminium pole that I picked up from a fishery down in southern England for £6, and it's been a belter. It's been fantastic. So we have moved on from that original effort, but we do still work as a team. So coming on to this slide here, and this really just shows you, we set up a Google Drive hub for all our information. So what you see here is just a screen capture of some of the folders that we've got there. And it's really just to give you a feel for, the amount of stuff that we chucked in there. So all the good stuff that you guys have produced in terms of thermal imaging info and others, we've got a folder for that. We've got photos of the birds, various bits of literature, just a go-to place that, we can tap into and look back. And then some of the other files I'm just going to bring up and just give you a flavour for what we looked at. But, as I say, I don't know about Stephen. Maybe he can, give you his own views. But I don't think, in retrospect, I would go back and change this. I think this has been really helpful for allowing us to develop things as we've gone on. So, just drilling down into some of the data that we capture from each visit. This is our catch summary spreadsheet. So a lot of the normal stuff you would expect to see in there, visit date and who was there and all that. But the section here, birds caught and ringed, obviously, goes without saying. But we also noted how many days it was since our last visit. We wondered if that might have an impact if we were visiting regularly or leaving it a longer period of time. But also this next column over here, birds flushed. And we'll come on to a map shortly where we even drilled down to where those were, or we did initially. And there's also a column for other birds encounters. So principally woodcock, jacks and snipe, but we also make a note of other birds. So lapwing, fieldfare, skylarks are all featuring to a different extent there. Make a note of weather conditions. And again, that's been quite useful for us to look back and compare this year with last year because the weather conditions are actually quite different. And then a comment section, which is a critical analysis of me beating myself up when I've cocked it up with a net, or making a note of other issues. And again, one of the reasons that we like to work in a pair, it's good company, but also it's very, very difficult to wield a big net over that period, that length of time effectively when you're trying to do thermal and dazzling too. So we go with a very long 3-meter handle on our net, and it minimises the amount of walking we need to do up to the bird, so we can net at a reasonable distance, and the ground is pretty wet, pretty squelchy. So again, it helps us not having to walk right up to the birds closely or quickly. So our approach is probably a lot slower than many people would use. So moving on, this is where you think it might come to overkill here, but in the early days, Stephen always carries his GPS with him, so he produced an encounter map here for every visit that we did, so he gets some idea of the site, and the scale at the bottom there gives you an idea of the distances that we're walking on site there. So the blue just shows our walking track. Picked a good one here because there's a wee story here. So Field Fair was a nice one that we got that night out. We also had lapwing, which we successfully dazzled and netted, and then found out we didn't actually have a ring for it. So that doesn't happen very often.
That's not a good story, Kevin. That's a bad story.
No, that's a bad story, but that's a truthful story. So that's one of the few occasions when it happened. So our trainer had a good laugh is maybe not the right words, but a wry smile at us, and then he managed to repeat that exercise with you, didn't he, Stephen, himself, when he was out? Yeah, yes, for a red grouse, was it?
Yeah. I think that would have been the Ringing Group's first ever red grouse. Yeah.
So we're now immune from any criticism from our trainer due to that one. But again, the coloured ones here, so woodcock there, jack, woodcock, and you see down here, there's no blue line down here, simply because the batteries ran out on the GPS at that point. Okay, but it gives you a feel for the track that we walked, and you can probably see now, looking at the scale, how we could easily clock up 46 miles of a session across that. Just to give you an idea of the kind of geography, this is quite elevated, these fields up here, and down here is lower level, but rougher ground, and Stephen will talk about that later on.
And if I could just chip in, all of these records of the birds that we encounter are just kind of rough estimates, so none of them are we're not logging every single bird. I'm just taking a kind of mental memory of it, and it's only because I know these fields quite well from having been there for a significant period of time. But any birds we do catch, we take the GPS recording for every single catch location, which has proven to be quite useful, as I'll come on to explain later on.
I think fairly familiar with the fields is an understatement. As I say, we were out one night in dense fog, to the point that I was actually getting a wee bit scared, but he managed to get us back to the farmhouse without any problem. So he knows that place like the back of his hand. Okay, moving on. This is our ringing data spreadsheet here, which we also populate. And again, a lot of information in here, but what I want to bring your attention to is we highlight the retraps in blue, and as Stephen mentioned, we do GPS to 10 figures the location of these birds, so we know within a few meters where these birds are getting caught, and that's been really important for us going forward when we actually look at the retrap data that Stephen's going to talk about in a wee while. And again, just some usual biometrics in there that you would expect to see. Okay, so this map here shows you the catch pattern with relation to particular months of the year. So red dots showing catches of any wader species from September to December, and the green showing January to March catches. And it's quite interesting if you actually look at that, there's clearly a favoured area on that site for December, September to December. Okay, and similarly for January to March, there's another preferred location. Now, Stephen will go on to talk about, you know, the fact that in this area towards the top of the site in red, we tend not to go up there from kind of late February onwards because lapwings are returning and establishing this site, and we don't want to disturb them there. But if we then look at the same map and plot the species against it, you start to see some interesting patterns come out there. So in here, you're getting a mixture, you know, the woodcock in blue and commons in green. You know, there's a good mixture of birds that we're catching in September to December there. And likewise, there's still a reasonable mixture of birds in the January to March circle. But if you look at the area down to the left here, you'll see there's very, very few commons down there. So what we're noticing is, you know, from September to December, this is the area largely where we're expecting the commons to appear. So it allows us to target our efforts at the beginning of that year when those birds are easier to catch. We struggle from probably after November, Stephen, yeah, to get those birds. And we maybe improve again late February into March, we'll get a few. Okay, so I'll move on to Stephen. He'll take you through some more analysis looking at the birds now.
Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, the good thing about, you know, as the way we're recording it is we're getting an idea for the birds that we're catching and ringing and maybe retrapping, but we're also doing the sort of wider survey element of it, and that's building up a nice picture of how the birds are using the site and what times of year they're maybe passing through. So I'd say, you know, with still being relatively early days, we're kind of finding that there is a bit of variation between where the different species are found, and that just related to their ecology really. So we tend to find the jack snipe in the wetter patches, woodcock are quite well distributed, and then snipe are maybe a bit intermediate between the two other species. So one thing to highlight, and it will crop up in the next few slides, is that the thermal in particular has been really, really useful in detecting some of the smaller species such as the jack snipe, simply because their eye shine is much harder to detect. So when we were using the binocular and lamp or torch method, you know, woodcock eyes are relatively easy to pick up, and the binoculars actually allow you to pick out some of the smaller species. So, you know, occasionally we would find a skylark or something by eye shine, and the jacks are a wee bit easier than a skylark. But since we've had the thermal, that has really you know, made a big difference in terms of having the confidence that we're at least finding all the birds, even if we're not catching them all. And that helps with the survey element, because it's helping us get a much better reflection of just what numbers are passing through and where the birds are. And just finally on this slide, the time of year, and I think, you know, many other ringers that do similar stuff will have picked up on this. The time of year influences how catchable some species appear to be. So for snipe in particular, as Kevin mentioned, September, October, we found we had pretty good success catching snipe. So we could catch, and it is all relative, but we could catch, you know, 2 or 3 in a night. But we were maybe seeing 50 or 60 in a night. But even at other times of year where they're more numerous, we're not necessarily catching them all. So I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about the 3 species in turn. If you could go on to the next one. So in a common theme here, this was actually the very first bird that we caught and couldn't ring because Kevin didn't have the right rings with him, because we weren't really expecting to catch a jack snipe the first night we went out. So this was our first jack snipe, and sadly one that we didn't ring and just had to let go. But I thought at that time, oh, we're not going to get many more of them. They're not that easy to find. We don't have that many. And you know, quite gladly. It's been a much better story than that. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So a wee bit to take in on this map, but in summary, when we started between January and March last year, we caught and ringed 8 jack snipe with the binocular and eye shine method. And between October and November of the following, you know, in the same year after the breeding season, we subsequently recaught 4 of those 8 birds. So these are the initial and then retrap locations for each of the 4 birds with the date. So they were all ringed initially in February, and then these lines join up where we caught them coming back through the site after the breeding season, which was a really useful in terms of the aging for us to see these known adult birds. But the numbers along the lines show you the distances between where we caught them and where we retrapped them. So I think that by far exceeded our expectations of really what we would get in terms of a return from these birds. You know, especially, you know, a couple of these 2, they've gone all the way to the breeding grounds and then they're back to within 100 metres of where we ringed them in February. So that in itself has been fantastic, and you know, getting 4 out of 8 we were really pleased with, and thermal, as I've mentioned, will only have helped improve our chances of these, because all the retraps were caught with thermal. And the other interesting element to this is that we haven't actually seen any of these birds the rest of the winter, so it's leading us to think that they're perhaps staging and passing through. So we kind of hope we might get some of them back through this sort of spring passage, you know, as we might have done when we originally caught them, but it's not shaped up this year to be it's quite as good in terms of the numbers we're seeing. So kind of spring and autumn passage, we might see 10 to 15 across the site, and a good night we might catch 4 or 5. But this spring, you know, late winter, spring, we've kind of had a lot less birds. Woodcock seem to have left a bit quicker, but jack snipe might be related to the fields being a lot drier this year than they were last year. So if you go on to the next slide, Kevin. So although we didn't catch any of those between winter season birds again this winter, we have actually caught quite a few, you know, within, you know, a couple of months of each other within the same period. So these lines, it's hard to distinguish between them all, but these join up to subsequent retraps of individuals. And the most interesting part, I would say here, is that the birds that are found along this linear track, which is a good feeding site, are recaught on that same area. Some of them a week or 2 later, some of them a couple of months later. And in comparison, some of them that are up in these fields to the right, which have some nice wet patches, again, are recaught within those same bits. So this is where the thermal has been particularly useful, but also actually taking your accurate GPS spread references, because otherwise we would probably lose some of this neat information. So if you go on to the next one, that'll kind of hone in on where the thermal's really given us that advantage. So kind of across the site, it's been really good for all the small birds, the passerines and jacks, but it's most useful in some of the wetter areas where we find the jacks most often, but also the areas where the vegetation's a little bit more rough. So across a lot of it, we've got short green grass, which is quite easy to pick up eye shine, but some of the bits are more rushy, a bit more rank, and that's where the heat signatures stand out a lot better. You do still need to work them, you know, to get that heat signature to stand out, but it's far better. So if you look at these hatched areas, that's kind of giving you an idea of some of the birds we've caught that we might not have caught in the days before thermal.
And just picking up on what Stephen's saying there, if you have a look at these hatched areas, principally I've only highlighted the ones in purple, but it's principally jacks where we're benefiting here in these hatched areas. You could argue that the green ones, which are the woodcock mainly, you would probably have picked up down this area anyway through eyeshine. But a good proportion of these jacks down here and up here, we probably wouldn't have seen, or Stephen probably wouldn't have seen. So it's a real good example of where thermal's just, being a game changer.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're coming. Yeah, worth mentioning just while we're on thermal advantages that our technique's a bit different. So previously there would be a lot of using the beam to try to pick out the eye shine. So pretty much you're going into the field, you do a quick pass, within 100 meters in front of you to see if you're seeing anything with eye shine. You put the light off, or you wait and you put it back on when you're onto a bird. So now we don't need to do that. We're only putting the light on when we really need to. And as I think other people will be doing, it means we can avoid, flocks of birds that we're not really going to be catching anyway. But this period past, we've got a lot more. I say a lot more. We've got a few passerines, some redwings and fieldfares, and particularly a few more skylarks, just because we're increasing our chances by seeing a lot more by using the thermal. So that is a big advantage. So I think the next slide, Kevin, and I'll talk about the two other species, woodcock and common snipe. So woodcock's typically the most numerous species on the site. This winter, we've had a few less, I would say, numbers, with it being a kind of later, with the migrants arriving a little bit later. We never really saw the peak numbers before the really cold spell in December, which kind of froze most of the site and probably pushed quite a few on. So numbers never really recovered from that. And then numbers have dropped off maybe a good 2 or 3 weeks earlier than this time last year. So that's a nice bit of information that's coming out by doing all this. But typically, at the peak, we could encounter 40 or 50 woodcock in a night. And I think the most we've ever caught in the night's about 7 or 8, which is a pretty good night for us and keeps us out for quite a wee while. So for snipe, they also breed on the site. So we've got breeders coming back in March, but their numbers really peak earlier than the other two species. So kind of September, October, we can see up to 60 passing through before the others have returned. So that's the best time for us to catch them. And then they seem a bit more less hardy and don't winter in the same numbers as the other two species. So I'll come on to the next slide, Kevin. So I think we've probably covered a few of these things already. They're probably the last one we haven't, and that's just that it's, because we can effectively see in the dark now, it's given us a much better idea of what birds we wouldn't have seen before. So some of them are flushing before we even had a chance to see them, but also it gives us a better idea of what they're doing once we bring them and we're letting them go. So that's been useful. So on to our next steps. As you'll have gathered, we're quite into this. Spend a lot of time on it. It's a night doing the work and going around the fields, and it's another night just about doing the data. So we have stripped that back a wee bit to what's really useful, but we're just constantly wanting to build on it. And we plan to continue doing this, but we're wanting to add other elements. So one of those is incorporating looking for roosting jacks during the day, and obviously the thermals, a big key to that, because they're pretty much impossible for us to find without it. But for other species like skylark and owls, particularly owls, we've found them to be really good at giving us an idea of what they're doing on the site. Not that we've gotten any better at catching them, because we've got one long-eared owl this winter, but it's given us fantastic information about how many are on the site and what they're doing, their behaviour.
Are they
And
hunting
then-
Are they hunting the waders, Stephen? You get shorties hunting the waders.
No, we've never really. We've seen them trying to go for hares, but they're not really going for waders. Not that we see them. Mostly across rougher ground, so they're probably going for voles. And we're at a good vole period at the moment, so we did have quite a lot of voles in the autumn.
I think you've hit the nail right on the head around the jack snipe, and it's great that someone's sharing what they're doing with them. Because we had a new site last year, and we found 60 that we never even knew were there. Just using thermal with the light pollution we get, it's hard to see anything, let alone a woodcock. So to use the thermal, it's been really useful, especially for like skylark and jack snipe especially. So it's been fantastic. And as you said, the thermal's allowing you to avoid the birds that you don't want to disturb as well. So if there's large roosts, you're able to walk around it, and it's reducing time in the field as well, which is really interesting to hear. Is that what?
Yeah, and just the last point there. You know, our wish list would be a Russian control, but hey ho, you know, we can always dream. And you know, that's it, really, guys. You know, that's us.
We'll settle for one of your jack snipe.
Yeah, we'll have one of yours. It's been a really good, useful chat. I think what you're doing with, especially with relation to the data, is really interesting. Yeah. I'm with you on aluminium poles. Ben's carbon fibre. I've broke far too many aluminium ones. Carbon
but driving over them doesn't count, mate.
Yeah. Well, driving over one, that was one of the occasions, but stepping on a few has been quite, and woodcock breaking them. But just interested in relation to sort of the habitat you've got, and I can understand walking across there with wet feet. Are you finding? Do you use the sound to mask your feet? Do you use a MP3 player in your pockets?
We've done it sometimes, and I think at first we thought it was working. And I think part of that is that it makes us forget about the noise, which is a bit counterintuitive, because that is, I think, part of the problem. But then latterly, we're starting to think that they're almost associating the noise with us coming. So recently, we've actually just stopped using it, and we just try and go as slow as possible to minimise that squelch. I've done it with other people on like stubble, and you know, you can't avoid it, but we can kind of avoid our noise a bit. But yeah, I still say I'm not sure whether it actually makes any difference for us, but it'd be interesting to hear about you.
I think if I'm honest, I think it does make a difference for us, but then I also think that probably I'm so used to it now, it's more routine. So I get in, get my thermal out, my sound's in my pocket, and it's on. So I do find that I've always got it on, and the occasions where I perhaps don't catch the birds that I'm expecting to catch, I blame it because my MP3 is packed in, but it's just interesting. I think it's all about the confidence of the person who's ringing, if that makes sense. So I think if you're confident without it, then it's each to their own.
Guys,
I'm conscious of time there, guys. Are we drawing a line under this, or are we logging back in, just to be clear?
Yeah. We'll log back in to have a chat after if you want.
Yeah, so I've just got to stop the recording now, and I'll close the session and see if we can get back in. But thanks everyone for.
Thanks again, guys. It's been a fantastic listen.
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant.